I've known Graeme since 1990 from the University of Brighton, and he's been a good friend, and he has been involved in a whole lot of different things throughout his career. He's now retired and started up and found out more about astronomy, and I'll leave him to talk more about it. He's told me he will tell you more about himself now. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Hello. Good evening, everybody. Back in June 2021, I finally fulfilled a long-term ambition and bought myself a decent telescope. It was 2006 vintage 8-inch Celestron CPC 800 Schmidt Cassegrain, actually. It was bought second-hand with advice from members of an astronomy society. Even over a lockdown Zoom call, which is when I got that advice, it was obvious that if you ask a bunch of astronomers which telescope to buy, you'll get as many answers as there are people. And moreover, when I revealed my desire to share images from my observations, there was a clearly audible, sharp intake of breath that warned of significant difficulties and or expense. However, this presentation will give a quick guided tour of my joyful discovery that even complete beginners can achieve astonishing images of the spectacular planets in our solar system from their back garden. Even better, this is achieved with the aid of extraordinarily competent software that's completely free to use. Now, given my history as an educator of 34 years in all aspects of applied image acquisition and processing that Deshi alluded to earlier, it should come as no surprise that when I tackled astronomy, I would want to capture and process images and share them with others, even in my retirement. So, this is my planet suite, showing all the planets in the solar system with the moon standing in for Earth for obvious reasons. I don't have any rockets available. All have been captured using that venerable Celestron CPC 800 that I bought in 2021. There it is, sitting in the middle, and an image taken from its manual. Now, all of these images were processed using similar methods to those I'm talking about today, except for the moon, Uranus and Neptune, which are single-frame captures taken through the telescope with my digital SLR. But why the interest in free software, I hear you ask? Well, during my teaching career, I quickly recognised that proprietary software licenses were a major financial burden for my employers, even with educational discounts. Even more important, such licenses hindered my students from undertaking practical exercises whenever and wherever they wanted to on their own computers. And in my view, that is a major factor in successful uptake of learning of advanced image-based processing methods. So, I became adept at seeking ways to use free software tools to permit that. This became ingrained in my teaching philosophy, such that I now see exploitation of free software as a way of democratising access to the development of knowledge in learners, not just students, all learners. This leads me to adapt my processing workflows and to accept compromises where that is necessary, such that anyone can follow my example without financial restrictions. I approached my new hobby of astronomy with exactly the same desire to share my results with others, as illustrated in the image on the left here. And I'm about to illustrate what I've learned about exploiting free software tools to achieve wonderful planetary imaging results with relatively entry-level equipment, which you can see me using back in November 2023 in the two images on the right. And notice that I actually have a hat that matches my fleece that says Portslade Planetarium, because that is my alter ego. Okay, you never guess where I live. I should acknowledge that others who are happy to throw money and time at the hobby can certainly achieve much better results. And that was the reason, I'm sure, for the sharp intake of breath when I outlined my intentions to the panel of astronomers that I asked for advice on buying a suitable telescope. However, I was lucky that one of them, a guy called Russ Slater, happened to be the volunteer equipment manager for the South Downs Planetarium, and he arranged for me to buy a donated telescope that suited my needs, and then patiently and generously tutored me in my initial steps in buying accessories and trying out new techniques. So you could say it's all down to him, really. Okay, then I was able to let my curiosity, research skills and background experience do the rest in developing the processing workflow for planetary imaging, some of which I'm about to demonstrate to you. As such, I will overview the free software tools that I've discovered to support every step. Not in the order that I discovered them, but as used to follow an enhancement workflow for a case study of a rare and interesting image of Jupiter captured on the 18th of September 2021. Now, it's notable that this acquisition was less than 4 months after I acquired my telescope, and only the second time, circle in here, that I'd ever used my new planetary camera, which was this thing here. It fits in the back of the telescope. But what motivated me to collect an image of a shadow crossing event of Callisto? Well, the answer is in front of you. This was a rare event because Callisto's 17-day orbital period means that its shadow misses the planet's disk for more than half of Jupiter's 12-year orbit. Not only that, but on this occasion, Callisto's shadow was forecast to fall on or near the Great Red Spot, the huge storm feature that's been raging continuously in Jupiter's atmosphere for at least 150 years. So this unusual conjunction event was highlighted in the September 2021 observing guides of both astronomy periodicals that I subscribe to, which I've got in my bag if anyone wants to look. However, while Astronomy Now draws attention to the likelihood that Callisto's shadow would impinge on the Great Red Spot on the night of the 17th, 18th of September, it does not specify the time, which is annoying. By contrast, the Sky at Night guide doesn't mention the proximity of the two objects, but does specify the time frame of the shadow transit of Callisto to a window that runs from 24:43 on the 17th when it starts until 03:55 on the 18th when it sets. So that's a long time frame. But I was very motivated as a new astronomer to capture this rare event for posterity. But that is an interval of time which is over 4 hours. That's a long time to wait and remain alert. It's also an impractically long period of time over which to collect video data. So you can't just leave a video running whilst you track Jupiter. And collecting video data is what's required for robust planetary imaging, as we will see. So it was essential then to narrow down the time of the conjunction to be ready to capture a short video segment at the salient time. And this is where my first piece of free software comes into its own. It's called Stellarium. It's an amazingly competent at modelling what will be observable, not only in the present but also in the future and the past. This brief demonstration gives an insight into how it was used to enable me to be prepared, to be prepared to capture a usable video clip actually at 01:34 BST on the night of the 18th of October 2021. As you can see from the bottom of this screen, Stellarium has been set up to model the view of the sky from a location that's my garden in Portslade. I stress that is not my garden. That is just a generic background view. I haven't figured out how to program that so it looks like my garden yet, and I'm not going to. So now I'm going to pause the time base of Stellarium, and I'm going to reset it to that date in the past when, at the beginning of the shadow transit. So that was in September the 17th at 23, what did we say? 43. Okay, so that's what the sky looked like, an approximation. We'll be looking over my garden fence faces south, looks out over the sea. So that would be the view I have looking towards the sea from my garden, and you can see Jupiter is prominent in the southwestern sky. And I can double click on it, which gives it focus, and you can see I confirm that I'm actually looking at Jupiter, and I get a whole load of arguably interesting data about Jupiter. Now, if we zoom in to Jupiter, like that, you can see that at that time, as predicted by the observing guide, the Great Red Spot is just there on the eastern limb of Jupiter, and there is the shadow of Callisto. There's Callisto itself. So that was all good, but this would not make a good image of either object being right out on the limb like that. You get limb darkening and also, and anyway, it's right up, not a good composition, is it? So I wanted to find out when the Great Red Spot would be more central on the planet's disk and how the shadow would move in relation to it throughout the period of the transit. And this can be easily explored with Stellarium, so I'm just going to increment the hour counter here. So that's at 0:43 on the 18th, and then 1 hour later we've got to recenter it. And so now you can see that around that time, around 1:43, in the early hours of the 18th of September, then there was a good composition, a nice composition of the shadow of Callisto taking a bite out of the Great Red Spot. So it would be good to try and capture images around that time. It would be nice if you could say that's exactly the time when I'm going to do it, but it doesn't work like that. So now I'll quickly simulate how I could expect Jupiter to look through my telescope fitted with my camera, with the star diagonal and so on. So what I do then is click this button in Stellarium, and it shows me, it models the view through my camera. You can see it's I've programmed my camera and its pixel count and the pixel size and all that. There's my telescope there, which we know about the focal length and all that. And there are no additional lenses at the moment. Now, it's really useful that Stellarium allows you to program the parameters of all your optical devices so you can anticipate what you can expect to see on the night. And as such, Stellarium knows the field of view of my planetary camera through my telescope, which we can see in the image here. Now, notice that I decided on the night to rotate the camera to this angle here, indicated by this red frame, basically so that the long axis of the image sensor was roughly parallel to the the plane, the equatorial zones, and the plane of the moons, of the Galilean moons. Now, this decision had implications for atmospheric dispersion correction, as we'll see later. It might not have been the best decision I've ever made, but we can cope with it. Now, clearly there's room for more magnification in this, and luckily I had some optical devices which allowed me to do that. So I've got a Barlow lens, and I can put that in two places. I can either put that after the star diagonal or in front of it. And if I put it afterwards, I get a magnification of 2 times, like that. So that's what it looks like. And I think we can take a bit more. So if I put it after the star diagonal, before the star diagonal, I get 3 times magnification, roughly. It's not perfect, but roughly. So I've modelled it as 3 times, and that is the sort of field of view that I believed I was entitled to expect. Now you can compare that with the results that I actually got. So Callisto should be way off to the edge, towards the edge of the frame on the right of the planet. And as you can see, the Great Red Spot and the shadow of Callisto sort of roughly in the middle, just below the equator. So I had a clear specification now for observing this event in the real world. So that is to aim for recording data around 1:43 BST, with plenty of useful tolerance around that time. I played with that, so I knew that it wasn't going to be the end of the world if I didn't hit that time exactly. And in the end, my capture was centred on 01:34. I'll say a little bit about why. Now, before we leave Stellarium, let's just look at some of the data which is up here. So on that date and time, you can see the azimuth and the altitude is 16 degrees 12 minutes. That's quite low. As we saw, it's quite low to the horizon. And that means it's going to be prone to a lot of atmospheric disturbance because the atmosphere is thick. You're looking through a lot of atmosphere at the planet. And you're also going to get atmospheric dispersion, where you get a splitting of any white light into a sort of a rainbow spectrum. And that atmospheric dispersion is going to occur in a vertical axis. In other words, along there. And I see that doesn't align with the vertical axis of my sensor. We'll see that later. Also, the equator of Jupiter was tilted at around 48 degrees below the horizontal, and there'll be a test on this later. I'll be coming back to that right at the very end. So this is how the scene would look in binoculars if you had binoculars that were sufficiently powerful to do that, and it's the orientation to aim for, ultimately, in the presentation of images of the Jovian system. So now I'm going to quit Stellarium and go back to my PowerPoint. Okay, and fumble. Okay, now, it's tempting to think of Stellarium using the way described as a sort of viewfinder for my telescope and camera combination. And up to a point it is. But it has pros and cons compared to a real through-the-lens viewfinder. The big pro, as I've already mentioned, is that you can see in the past and you can see in the future as well as the present. That's brilliant. And that's why I can reconstruct these things for you. Conversely, though, it's not real-time, real-world view, and thus cannot predict the weather and the impact on the practicality of observing. So it does actually predict, it models the atmosphere. So it's a lovely scene where if you look at a star, you can see it sort of flickering because of the way it models the atmosphere. But anyway, so more generally then, I use another piece of software to anticipate the feasibility of astronomical observations. It's called Clear Outside, and it's made freely available by an organisation called First Light Optics, which is an astronomy equipment supplier. And it forecasts your location's latitude and longitude and has a really useful set of features. I'm not going to go through them all, you can see them here. But for example, this is today's forecast. I did this about 10 a.m. this morning. And you can see at a glance, looking at the colour of these boxes along the top, that tonight is not going to be a good night for astronomy, because if you look at the dark hours, you can see that they're all coded in red segments or amber segments, which means basically. But tomorrow night, you don't even need to see all this gubbins underneath, which explains why they're coded that way. But you can see tomorrow night, in the hours of darkness, we've got 3 hours of useful, usable astronomy possible. Now, as it happened, on the night of the 18th of September 2021, a thing called Sod's Law came into play. And with my inexperience, I had problems setting up the telescope to track Jupiter. And by the time I had got that right, it was 1:33 and 35 seconds BST. When I managed to grab just over a minute of video, 1 minute 11 seconds I think it was. I probably would have preferred 3 minutes, but Jupiter disappeared behind some cloud. In fact, it popped out of cloud. I'd sort of given up on the idea of astronomy based on the weather forecast, but then I looked out just as I went to bed and I saw Jupiter bright as a button. So I hauled my 81 pounds worth of telescope into the back garden and set it up and then faffed about. Anyway, I just managed to capture it because it disappeared for good after that. There was no second chance really with this. So we should all consider ourselves very lucky that we've got this to look at. Okay, so now let's have a very quick look at the free fire capture software which I use to control the camera for that exposure, although this screen is showing is a capture from when I was using that camera on the night of the 24th of November 2023 at the planet party that I showed you pictures of earlier. these are the various conditions, and you can see it's a very feature-rich piece of software which offers pretty much everything you could possibly want. And that's all I'm going to say about it, because I just don't have time. I much prefer to talk about the processing. Okay, so now let's look at what we can do with the data set that was recorded on that night. The video was recorded in a .ser format. I'd never heard of that until I started astronomy, but it's recommended by experienced astrophotographers. But because I'd never heard of it, I didn't have previously an SER file player. So I did a bit of research back in 2021, and that revealed this free pair of tools written by Chris Gary called Planetary Imaging Preprocessor, or PIP, and its accompanying SER player. Now, both are indispensable to me now, and they still work even under Windows 11. But as I demonstrate these marvellous free software tools, please be aware that the original source website listed in their About files has now been shut down. I don't know why, but luckily, both tools are currently archived on a site called astrowatt.com, but nobody knows for how long. So if you're interested, then go get them quick, is my recommendation. And they'll probably carry on working until about Windows 13 or something. Okay, so this is the file. This is the still frame from the file that was recorded at 1:34 BST on 18th of September 2021. Let's have a quick look at this raw data set. Okay, there you go. So there it is, and you can see that it's quite promising. You can see Jupiter with belts and zones visible, albeit with low contrast. You can see the shadow of Callisto here, and it's close to something orangey, which is most probably the Great Red Spot, given what we know about the predictions. However, everything is wobbly due to atmospheric disturbance, noisy due to low light levels, and the upper left limb of the planet has got a blue fringe, and the lower left limb has got a red fringe, and you may already be able to guess why that is. Now, if you consider that the angle that my sensor was tilted at, you realise that this was the vertical through here. So what this is actually is atmospheric dispersion. So it's like a rainbow. You've got the blue end up here, and you've got the red end down there, and that's why we've got the those fringes. Now, it's characteristic, this vertical rainbow smearing. So what I'm going to do is actually, as early as possible in the processing chain, I'm going to do atmospheric dispersion correction. You can buy optics that do this, but I didn't have that at the time, and they're quite expensive, and they're also fiddly to set up, and they're a bit of a pain, really. Anyway, you can do it with software after the fact, but there's a price to pay, I think. So what I'm going to do is turn on the tool. Remember I said this was competent software, all this stuff. I mean, this has got tools, right? So what I'm going to do is whack up the colour saturation, and you can really see the atmospheric dispersion very clearly now. You can see the blue fringe. Can't see the red fringe so clearly because the planet is orange anyway. Right, so I'm going to use these colour align controls. So you can see we've got a problem with we need to move the blue over to the right. So I'm going to increment the X count of the blue by 3 pixels. And I'm going to decrement the X count of the red by 3 pixels, okay? And now you can see our dispersion is aligned with the sort of poles of the planet, which is good. And then bearing in mind that it was all roughly 45 degrees, so I'm going to go for 3 pixels up and down as well. So I'm going to drop the blue by 3 pixels, and I'm going to lift the red by 3 pixels. And I think you'll agree with me that that's done a pretty decent job of correcting for the dispersion, right? So now let's reset the saturation. And now we have got a reasonably well atmospheric dispersion corrected version of the planet. And I'd be quite pleased to be looking at that down my eyepiece if I was a visual astronomer, which I am sometimes. So voila. Now remember, we also expected to see the moon Callisto. Where is it? Should be present in this image. However, if I freeze this, let me just take this back towards the beginning. Freeze it there. And then I'm going to non-linearly, watch the histogram. Sorry, you can't see where I'm pointing, the histogram up here. I'm going to non-linearly stretch that by using the gamma control. And you can see I've got this non-linear contrast adjustment. But now I don't think you'll have any difficulty seeing where Callisto is. So Callisto, sure enough, is there in the field of view, as roughly as Stellarium predicted it should be. Right? So it's all good. Now, if I fast forward through the video file, you can see that the planet drifts out of the field of view, which is not good. But nonetheless, Callisto is there all the time. So that's good. That's great. Okay. So I'm going to quit this serial player for now. Go to this slide. Right. We note that due to telescope tracking imperfections, Jupiter drifts downwards through the video, and eventually some of the planet leaves the field of view. So we must eliminate all frames that do not contain the whole planet for further processing. I use the planetary imaging preprocessor, PIP, to do this automatically, but it also serves to stabilize the position of the planet within the frame and to crop off featureless image area to reduce processing workload in the further on down the chain. So PIP does exactly what it says on the tin. It pre-processes raw data files. Okay, so let's have a look at PIP in action. Well, not quite in action. I'm still going to sort of fudge it a bit. So here is, down here, this says Jupiter 013411, early ADC, etc. So I drag that onto PIP, and PIP opens like this, and I just organise the windows a bit so you can see what's going on. And there is PIP's interface, and there is the output file from PIP at the moment, as things stand at the moment. Right, so there's a lot of wasted area there that we don't want to be bothering with processing, and we want to stabilize this planet and so on. So what I'm going to do is select planetary as the options to be optimized for, and I'm going to click the test options button, and you'll see that PIP has automatically cropped square where it's found the planet with a margin, with a sensible margin, which is really nice. That's great. And the reason it's done that, if we look at the processing options, is this is what we have selected by default. We've got a frame stabilization mode, which is object/planetary. Okay, it's good. Object detection is enabled, and the minimum size of an object is 25 pixels. Object detection threshold is set to auto, and I can test the threshold detection, and you can see it's finding Jupiter very nicely at those sort of settings. Go back to test the options there. Center of the object in each frame has been selected, and we are not expecting an edge. So we're not looking for a lunar terminator or anything like that. So that's none. And the cropping has been set automatically by PIP to 448 square. Now that's great, but I'm not happy with that, because as you know, Callisto is off to the right, and I want Callisto to be in my field of view. So it's a bit of a Blue Peter trick, this, because I know what settings we should use, but it's more or less the full width. So it's 900 pixels by 450. Okay, now I'm confident that Callisto will be in that window. Let me just show you what that window looks like. There we go. That's what the window is going to look like. And so I think you'll agree with me that given what we've seen about the field of view, we should expect Callisto to be in that. And it is, believe me. But I'll show you later. Right. Now, if we look at the output options tab of PIP, I can set it to SCR, because remember that's the video file my original was in, so I might as well stick with that. And then I will progress to the do processing tab, where PIP just helpfully runs a test run, which only takes 0.2 or 0.6 of a second. That's slow today. And you can see that everything appears to be good. It hasn't given us any warnings or anything. So I'm not going to actually run. I could start processing, but that takes about 70 seconds, and we've got better things to do. So I'm going to quit that now and go back to my PowerPoint and set that up here and run it again. Okay, so on the right-hand side, here you can see that the processing took 66.8 seconds to complete, and PIP has automatically clipped off 150 frames where the planet fell out of the field of view of the camera. So that's useful. That's cropping in time, or frames if you like. But it's also cropped the area of the images, as we've seen. And so we have a new smaller SCR file of 766 frames, each of 900 by 450 pixels. And we can inspect that with the serial player. There we go. So straight off you can see that the planet is stabilised in the centre of this 900 by 450 frame. You can see it's not drifting off. But it still suffers some atmospheric disturbance, noise, low contrast and low colour saturation due to what we astronomers call poor seeing. Now these problems will be addressed later, but first off let's verify that we've actually got the moon Callisto captured in this data, and you can guess what I'm going to do to check that. Go to processing, drag that out of the way, drag the gamma up, and there you go. You can see Callisto is sitting in the corner there, no one side. Okay, so don't need to reset that. So let's move on. Now, coping with the wobble and distortion caused by less than perfect seeing is where a thing called lucky imaging and image stacking comes in, for which we must be exceedingly grateful to this chap, Emil Kreykamp, and his collaborators from the Netherlands for producing AutoStackert. I'm using version 3, which does an amazing job. Lucky imaging implies that it's a program, such as AutoStackert, there are others, will search through the frames of a video file to sort out the good quality frames, which happen to have relatively low distortion, from the redundant, highly distorted ones. So firstly, there is a non-linear quality-based sorting process. The frames are put into quality-based order. And then you can choose to stack a percentage of the best quality frames to enhance the signal-to-noise ratio of your image data. Now, those of you in the know will realise that the signal-to-noise ratio is improved by the square root of the number of images that you sample. So if you can sample a lot of images, you get a significantly better signal-to-noise ratio, and that's why you do stacking. Right? So I will now return to the desktop to illustrate AutoStackert for you. So what I have to do is go off and find the output file produced by PIP, and I'm going to drag that onto the AutoStackert icon, which opens with the file open. Okay, now PIP has already done a pretty good job of stabilising the position of the planet in the frame, but we will take advantage of AutoStackert stabilisation features as well. And the default settings are the planetary centre of gravity, that's what COG stands for. We're going to pick the dynamic background selected. As far as quality estimation is concerned, we're going to accept the default Laplacian variant, and we're also going to accept local alignment points, that's what APs are, for quality estimation, because we have a stable background brightness, so that's why you would select the local version. and we're going to leave all the other settings at default value. So now I can click on the Analyze button, and this takes about, I don't know, less than 20 seconds probably. There you go. So now it's done the analysis, and you can see what we have here in grey is a graph of the quality, the rated quality of the frames in time order. That's what the grey graph is, and you can see that the quality drops very badly around this time here. But then the green graph is the quality ordered variant here. So we've got frames up here. We can go through the frames in quality order now. Not that I'm going to do that right this minute. Now you can see that after that quality-based sorting process, then approximately 50% of the frames are above the 50% quality level, and that's the recommended sort of cut-off really for that you should use for stacking. So we can stack about 50% of the frames, so about half of the 766. So you can do the square root of 766 over 2 and work out how much the signal to noise has improved. So now then, what I need to do is to control right click there, and I've selected that 50% point roughly. Up here you can see this is the statistics, so we're going to be using the top 49.9% of frames, and the quality at that point is 50.7. So 100% is the best quality, so we are, as you can see, operating about 50% cut-off level at that point. So that's what we're going to stack, right? Good. So now we need to choose some alignment points to allow AutoStacker to correct for fine scale movements caused by the atmospheric seeing distortions, the wobble. Right? Conventional wisdom suggests that we need around 40 alignment points to adequately cover the planet. And if we have too few rather, then we're not going to adequately stabilize the features. And if we have too many, we're going to waste processing time. So also there's some relevant things down here. I'm going to avoid close to edge, so I'm not going to put alignment points near the edge of the planet because you get limb darkening and all that sort of thing. I've got replace selected. I'll explain what that does in a minute, and I've got multi-scale. You'll see how that works too by illustration. So with these settings then, AutoStacker does a pretty good job automatically when I click this place AP grid. But notice it uses a default size of 72, starting size. You can see it's used multiple scales, that's the multi-scale feature. And you can see that it's going to have about 60 alignment points, which, as I said, is a bit too many. So we could do with less than that. So if I drop or increase the size up to 80 and then click place AP again, and I don't need to clear them first because that's what replace does. So now I've got 44, and that's good for me. So I'm going to stick with that size of alignment points. But now I'm going to delete all those and do something else. Because the whole point, you remember, about what makes this interesting is the moon and the shadow of the moon, right? So we want to make sure that those two things are stabilized. So let's clear those alignment points. And what we'll do now is go off in search of the moon, first of all, and we'll put an alignment point around that to make sure that that gets stabilized, okay? So I'm going to deselect replace because I don't want to lose these alignment points after I've carefully defined them. Now I could start with, what I'm going to do first of all is drag this back to the best quality frame, so that's what's being displayed now. Let's start by finding where the moon is. So we've got this handy little button here, so I can increase the brightness. That's 8 times, that's 16 times. I'm pretty sure you can see Callisto now, yes? If anybody can't, I can make it brighter still, okay? So there's Callisto. Now then, I can go off and put an alignment point centered on that moon there. Now I think that's too big. I'm going to drop it down, and again, blue Peter time. This is, if I right click on it and select again, I think that's going to be okay, and I'm going to test it. Remember, we're stacking 50% of the frames, so I want to go out to about 400 and you can see that the moon stays within that box during the whole of those frames. So that's good, I think. And I'm going to leave that there and put the brightness back down to 1 time so we can see the features on the planet. And now I'm going to place an alignment point on the shadow of the moon, and I'm going to use the same size. Again, practice makes perfect. So that works, and I can assure you that it stays within that box when we move through the frame, so that will save me a little bit of time. So I'm going to keep that there. Now then, if you remember, now I want to automatically place a whole load of other alignment points. So we've got replace turned off. We had a value of what was it, 80, gave us about 44 alignment points. So if I automatically replace those, then I get a total of 47. Don't ask me why 44 plus 2 is 47. I don't know. I'll just save you asking me that question because I don't know. It's just the way it is. All right, so now I can click stack. And it runs very quickly, actually. I mean, normally I would just move on, but I think it's just worth seeing how quickly Auto Stacker does its thing. And you can see it gives you, breaks it all down into its various stages. So now Auto Stacker has produced an output file, which is going to be a TIFF file, because that's what it says up here. Right, so now we can close that, and we can open my PowerPoint again. And we can go and look at this, which is a comparison between the original file and the Auto Stacker output, which is there. So on the right hand side you can see the output of Auto Stacker. So that's been stacked, 50% of 766 frames. Still frame from the original video on the left, and you'll notice the still frame is actually better than the sort of video really. We note that there's much lower noise than the video frame due to stacking, but it still looks blurred. And that's because of a point spread function that's due to the atmospheric disturbance, which has become convolved with the original stable image of the planet. That's a sort of signal processing explanation of what's gone on. Now we need to try and deconvolve the image content from that point spread function, but we don't know the specification of it. The point spread function, deterministically. That's why astronomers shine lasers into the sky. They effectively make an artificial star, and then they study that, and that tells them what the point spread function of the atmosphere is. But I can't do that, right? So we must use deconvolution filters instead to estimate and correct for the unknown point spread function. Right, now, moving swiftly on. There is no better tool that I know of than Registrax 6 to do this. It's very old now, relatively old anyway, for software terms, but it's a free tool. It's available only for Windows computers, so you can run it under emulators on Macs and Linux if you want. And it was created by a team of talented developers led by Cor Berreverts, also from the Netherlands. What is it about the Netherlands, I ask? Right, so I end my PowerPoint now. And I go and click Registrax now. I actually want to minimize that. Okay, now then, this is where Auto Stacker put the TIFF file that it created, and I drag that into Registrax, and there is our blurred view of Jupiter. So the noise has been improved, but it's still blurred. Okay, right. Doing. Right, so this is the interface. Registrax implements the required deconvolution process using multi-layered Gaussian wavelets, wavelet filters rather, to give us the means to interactively iterate towards an improved image. So I've loaded the image in there. Now, deconvolution is a form of sharpening implemented in Registrax in up to 6 different scales. So we've got 6 different layers here. Each represents a different scale. So hence the terminology applied to the layers in Registrax wavelets window here. So we've got layer 1, and you can see it's got a magnitude slider. It's got a denoise setting, and it's got a sharpen setting. So as you might expect, if you sharpen something, you're probably going to want to denoise it afterwards. Okay, so to try and speed up interactivity with the tools, which is quite important actually when you're doing this for the first time and not having done it before, then what Registrax does is it defaults to working in a processing window which is smaller than the full frame. That saves processing time. So if I go to settings, processing area, it's set currently for 512 by 512 pixels, and I know that's good. I know that's going to be good, so I'm going to leave it like that. And click show processing area, and you can see these little corners have appeared to show where the window is. I could move it if I want to, but why would I do that? Center it on the planet. So that's the window that's going to be used for interactive processing of the wavelets. Okay, so now then, before I do the wavelet magic, right, let me just digress very slightly, because I don't know about you, but I'm a bit bothered about this creamy look to Jupiter. It's quite pretty, but I don't think it's quite right. So I'm acting on the assumption that the brightest features in Jupiter's atmosphere are white rather than the sort of cream that we see here. So I'm going to use one of Registrax tools. Remember I said this is all very competent software, all this stuff. So you can see straight away why the peak brightness is imbalanced, is not white. Right? But also you notice there's an auto balance button, and if you click that, then it does it for you, right? And it actually looks quite good, so I think we'll have that. Right, let's leave it like that. So if it works, use it. That's what I say. So okay, now let's let them do the wavelet magic, right? We're going to try and sharpen the blur caused by the atmospheric disturbances, which we could clearly see in the video and the auto stacker output. Now, I so wish, I really do, I'm a bit OCD, I have to admit, and I really, really wish I could explain this all to you, but how Registrax wavelets work their magic, but I can't. I've not yet found a satisfactorily concise explanation for wavelet-based filtering. Don't tell me now, save it for later, that I could pass on to you. I'd love to do that. I would also like to be able to give you a scientifically rigorous process for determining the optimum wavelet configuration, but I can't do that either. Okay, but what I can do, well, just let me say this. I've got a theory, right, which is that in my experience, people with the smarts to implement tools like Registrax are often almost incapable of explaining to others how the tools that they create work. Okay? Now, I theorise that this is probably because their genius renders them unable to conceive that others less gifted cannot understand, right? So that you must be stupid if you don't know how this works. But since there's no meaningful user guide, it's forthcoming from the authors of Registrax, it's left to educators like me to attempt to interpret their work as helpfully as we can. So, what I can offer you is a form of intuitive trial and error based on trying to make the image better with each wavelet layer. Sometimes all 6 layers are beneficial, sometimes just the first 2 or 3, sometimes the first layer is best avoided. The authors of Registrax merely encourage experiment, I'm afraid. But for me, as a seeker of repeatability through methodology, which is how I've always approached teaching, you want to be able to show your students something which they can use for themselves and expect to work. So what I'm going to demonstrate to you is a hybrid of my own experience combined with guidance provided by various tutorials that attempt to impose some methodology for the use of Registrax that I've explored and tested with this data set. In particular, I'm going to build on my favourite tutorial source so far, which is called Wedo's Astro Forum, where there is a tutorial which is intriguingly entitled Registrax Tutorial How to Process the Planets, Part 2. Right? Now, I promise that I will show you the link for that tutorial later on, but not now. So turning to the wavelet controls, let's look at what we've got here. So I'm going to accept the default settings of automatic and hold wavelet setting, because that's what Wedo says, right? So I don't have time to go through every setting of this interface, but Wedo's tutorial will introduce you to everything if you're curious, right? Now, for now, all I will say is that I will select the wavelet scheme to be linear rather than dyadic, because dyadic is very, very extreme. I will also follow the guidance, which is to leave the initial layer at 1 and the step increment as 0. So layers go up in increments of 1. And similarly, I will retain the wavelet filter as Gaussian, which is the default in Registack 6. Don't believe this button that says default. Apparently, that was the default in an earlier version of Registax, and it never got taken out, right? So, but the default, proper default in Registack 6 is Gaussian, right? So we'll use that. So now I'll demonstrate a modified version of Wedo's linear wavelet scheme, which is described in this tutorial. And I found it works well with this data set. So I'll start by opening the histogram of the image data so you can see what the histogram looks like. If you're working with images, always have a histogram handy because they're very interesting and useful. Right? Now then, remember I've got show processing area checked, and that's all good. I haven't moved that. Now what I'm going to do is another Blue Peter trick. I'm going to upload Wedo's tutorial settings. Okay, because otherwise, you know, we wouldn't be going home tonight. Well, it's not that bad, but I found this was the best way to shave some time off this presentation. So, here we are. Wow, there you go. Now, I think you'll agree with me that this shows some promise. You know, that blurry image has been somewhat improved. But before I do that, before I talk about that, let me just show you what Wedo's done. He's actually started layer 1 with a magnitude of 100, and then he's decremented each layer by 10. Right? So that's a methodology, right? So he's set the denoise settings at 0.15 for the first 3 layers and 0.1 for the next 3 layers. And he set the sharpen settings in a roughly decreasing order, which is 200, 150, 130, 130, 110, 110. Okay, so that's Wedo's linear wavelet scheme, the most advanced version that he offers, right? Now, that's not bad, but it shows promise. It's got sharper details, better contrast, but far too noisy, by a long, long way for me. And you'll notice that the histogram is very flat, so we're not making good use of the levels in the image. So I'm going to now deviate from Wedo's rigorous guidance and make the following interactive adjustments based on my own experience. The first time I processed this image, I did it completely, I was just fumbling around, fiddling with wavelets, right? But I'm very pleased to have found a way to talk to you about a sort of methodical strategy. So, starting from Wedo's most superior version, we start at layer 1, and we want to reduce the noise. So I'm going to set the denoise up to 0.5. And there you go, the noise is better. I would say we've got a satisfactory noise level, details retained, but probably with some headroom for more sharpening, I think. Okay. So, all right, so let's look at these other layers then. We'll work down this. I'm just going to put in the values which I've determined for this. You'll see they come down in a decreasing range. So 0.30, 0.30 down here, 0.2 and 0.2. Right, so I reckon we've got satisfactory noise performance now. Detail is retained, but it's probably, as I said, some headroom for some more sharpness. So let's test that idea So we will increase the sharpening of layer 1. So I'm going to set that to 290. And I think that's better. It's actually quite difficult to watch the histogram and the image at the same time. So when you do it, you might want to play and do it twice and look at each. But you see the histogram change and you see the image change, and you can work out whether it's being useful or not from that. So the result is definitely a useful increase in details and contrast and change in the histogram, but the noise has increased. So let's increase the denoise a bit to control it. So I'm going to set that to 0.65. So obviously I played with this a bit, and so I'm giving you a sort of canned version now. So I think after we've done that, we've details retained and the noise looks better. So let's now try uplifting the successive layers in sharpness, terms of sharpness. So I've set that to 0.23. Now, I would say that it's a worthwhile overall improvement in detail and contrast with a notable change in histogram, and I think the noise is okay, so I'm going to leave that alone. Layer 3, I'm going to increase to 0.22. There we go. You can just see, if you watch it as that implements, you can see you've got a slight improvement in detail and contrast, especially in the brown northern equatorial belt up here, I find. Just noticeable change in histogram. The noise is lifted slightly, so let's increase the denoise a bit to control it. So I'll put 0.35 on there, just a little. That's what I kind of recommend, changes in increments of 0.05 in the noise anyway. So level 4, I'm going to increase the sharpening to 0.22. Okay, and definitely an improvement in the contrast there, and there was a noticeable change, tiny change in histogram. But I think the noise is okay with that, so I'm going to leave that alone. And then level 5, I'm going to go for 2.1. 0.21. Ooh. Yep, and again, a little bit more contrast, particularly around the brown equatorial belt, and very slight change in histogram, and I think the noise is okay. Now, there's a question for you. Is level 6 worth having? Right, okay, so to experiment with that, I will try switching it off. So let's turn it off and see if you can see any difference. Any difference? I didn't see any difference. So I think there's a negligible change. So that's tending to suggest to me that we've reached the limit of the number of levels we need, or layers that we need to work with. Now, if I leave that off and I turn off level 5, and you watch what happens to the image when I do that, you'll see there is a noticeable degradation in contrast. So level 5 is worth having, level 6 isn't. That's my deduction from that. So let's put level 5 back on, and I would say we're finished with wavelets at this point. So I'm going to press this button, do all. So instead of just processing the local area, it's going to do the whole thing. Where is Callisto? Can't see it, can we? Now, if we do all, now we can see Callisto, because it's now been wavelet enhanced like everything else. It wasn't being previously, but it is now. So it's still not very bright, but then it is much lower brightness, obviously, than the planet's disk. So that's not too surprising. So let's just talk about this end result we've got here. I'm calling this the end result. This scheme reveals a lot of detail in Jupiter's atmosphere and gives excellent contrast to the moon's shadow and the Great Red Spot, the northern and southern equatorial belts. It shows interesting coloration in the zones, especially the orange zone, which you see has got some blue tints in it, which are real. They're not artifacts, they are real. And just below the northern equatorial belt. And you'll also notice that the moon Callisto is just visible on the extreme right of the image, which is good. Now let's just double check what these layers do for us. So let me just, as you've seen, I can turn them off So if I turn off layer 1, see there's a big difference, right? So that's, turn off level 2, that's a big difference too. Level 3, big difference. Level 4, big difference. Level 5, quite a big difference, okay? So I'm reminding you now, this is what our image looked like as it came out of AutoStacker, being colour balanced, but apart from that, it's got all that blur in it, right? So that's how bad it looked before. And then this is what happens when we switch the wavelets back in turn. You can see basically the detail is building up. Okay, so I would say the wavelets make a really impressive difference. Yes, good, that's good. So I've done my job. Now I will click Do All again just to make sure that that gets fully applied. You can do some contrast adjustment in Registax, but my wife said, don't do that, you haven't got time, right? So I'm not going to do that. Because I practiced this in front of my wife to make sure it ran roughly to time. All right, now what I should do at this point is save the image. And if you don't, then Registax will nag you when you close it and say, "Do you sure you want to do this?" But I have saved it already, you know that. So I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to close the Registax window and see the nag screen. No. Right, there is the wavelet enhanced version. So let me restart my PowerPoint just to canter home past the finish post. Right, now I really would have loved to have shown you a bit more about this, and let me slow down and do this properly. Right, this slide summarises the improvements over the original captured video data achieved by AutoStacker and then Registax, respectively. It clearly shows the impressive level of detail that's been recovered with the use of these tools, especially resulting from Registax, but it needs the stacking first from an original data set. Actually, the original data set would have been quite pleasing to a visual astronomer using an eyepiece, albeit despite that the seeing conditions were not at all good, with significant levels of atmospheric disturbance and dispersion because of that low altitude. I mean, at the moment, Jupiter's much higher than it was back in 2021. So this year, the seeing is quite good, typically, and you get much better images of Jupiter. Look at my Instagram and Facebook page if you want to see some images of Jupiter from this year. Right, so I wanted to do some post-processing on this, and I'd love to have had the time to show you ImageJ, because I've been working with ImageJ for years now, and it's one of my favourite tools, and it's not very well known. And I'd love to have helped some of you get to know it better and some of its capabilities. It could be used to modify the contrast of the image and to rotate the image into a pose that would match the Jovian system on the night of the 18th of September 2021. And I haven't got time to show you how it's done, but these are the results, right? So all these post-processing operations were carried out in ImageJ and were significantly eased by its programmable nature. In particular, so first of all, that was the Registax output. Then I did a global contrast just over the range 0 to 221 out of 255. And then, because Callisto is almost invisible at this scale, I did a selective enhancement around Callisto using the range 0 to 105. And I did that by programming a circular region of interest centered on the moon itself. And that's something that ImageJ makes a breeze, actually. So you just find where the center is, and you can specify a region of interest. You can make it circular, and you can put it where you want it to be, and then you can stretch the contrast over just the region of interest. And that's how I improved the look of Callisto there. Now, I was also able to use, ImageJ's got a load of measurement tools in it as well, so I was able to draw a line across the equator of Jupiter, work out what its angle was, so the horizontal. And can anyone remember what the angle was from Stellarium when we collected the data? Anybody?
Yeah,
48. Thank you. That's because I warned you there was going to be an exam. Right. So anyway, good. Well done. So once you know what the actual angle of the equator is in this image, you can tilt it until it comes to 48 degrees below the horizontal. And that's what I did here. But of course, if you're going to do that and you want to keep Callisto in the field of view, you've got to enlarge the canvas of the image as well. And that, again, image J, it's a breeze. Right, so there you go. And that, I propose, is a pretty nice representation of Jupiter, the Great Red Spot, Callisto, and its shadow as it was on the night of the 18th of September 2021. So, I promised that I would show you the link to Guido's tutorial, and I don't think you need to write it down. If you're interested, I'm sure the slides will be available. I can make them available so they can be published. So there you have it then, an amazingly competent set of free tools, completely free, that have collaborated in delivering an impressive image record of a fascinating and rare conjunction event for posterity. Now, as promised, there's your tutorial, and that's what I used to inject some methodology, which I can't say, into my initial processing strategy, which had originally involved much trial and error fumbling with the Registax tool. Okay, so I hope you found this presentation interesting, and I'd now be happy to try and answer any questions that you might have if there's time.
This is fantastic.
Thank you. I think so.
You have the opportunity to be an expert and to get such great images. Any questions, guys?
You said you just got over a minute, sorry.
Yeah.
Go on then.
Over a minute worth of video.
Mm.
If you'd got 5 minutes worth of video, would that have been 5 times better?
No,
Precise?
no, because Jupiter rotates very rapidly, actually. And so, remember this was 4 months after I got the telescope and so on, so I wasn't particularly experienced when I did this, so it's kind of worked out lucky, really. But I understand now, from the position I'm in now, that if you want to deal with Jupiter's rotation, what you should do is take a series of short video clips, like I did, and enhance them the way that I have, and then de-rotate them using another free tool called WinJupos, which I didn't have, didn't have time for this, so I've never used it actually. Anyway, yeah, that's how you can deal with the rotation, because Jupiter rotates in 9 hours, I think. So if you work that out in terms of its angular rotation in a short space of time, you quite quickly get into blurring of the image as a result of its rotational speed. So not necessarily is the short answer to your question. Normally I go for about 3 minutes videos, and then I find they're okay as far as the rotation blur is concerned, and it gives you a bit to play with. You can always crop off the beginning or the end, or wherever the best quality is. You can do a bit of pre-processing that way if you want to. So that's the answer to that question.
When you were selecting the frames for processing and rejecting the ones that were below 50% signal to noise ratio, or
Quality.
Was it signal? Was it a straight?
Again, you're asking me things I probably can't answer. All I know is that AutoStacker has got this quality estimation range of settings, right? And it uses, the terminology is not quite right because it says Laplace and then it shows delta, but that apparently it's described as a Laplacian, so it's a Laplacian quality estimator. Quite how that actually operates, I don't care, frankly. But it does, and so what you've got to play with is that Laplacian setting, and you can change the how noise robust it is. And because this is a relatively noisy data set, it's set at a value of 6, which is the recommended setting for that kind of data. If you've got more noise, you can increase the noise robustness. If you've got less noise, if you've got better quality image data, you can decrease that. So those are things you can play with. That's really all I can say. I can't be much more helpful than that, I don't think.
Okay, so it's hidden in some pretty sophisticated software.
Precisely, and there, you know, Emil is one of those guys who he actually gives you more information, more help than the Registax authors do, because if you hover over each of his controls, you get a little hint comes up and tells you what that control does. At least you've got that. But yeah, and he's also written a tutorial which is quite useful. Actually, there's a PDF you can download which is quite useful about how to use AutoStacker.
Well, whatever it is, it seems pretty effective.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other questions?
Stunned into silence.
You bamboozled them.
I always find it like this.
David?
Not a technical question,
Okay.
but when you look through your telescope and you see things in real time and as they are, you must get a certain satisfaction.
Yes.
Is that satisfaction sort of increased or decreased by then doing lots of processing to something that was there at the moment?
Depends what you're looking at, basically. If you look through binoculars at the Pleiades, the first time people do that, they will probably go, oh my God, that's beautiful. The Pleiades is an absolutely startling thing, and the best way to observe the Pleiades is to get some binoculars about 10 times magnification, 50mm aperture, and just look at the Pleiades, and it's absolutely beautiful, stunning. And there are some other things like that. With a telescope, you can look at some double stars. There's Albireo is a very fine double star, which is a beautiful blue star and an orange star, which it's right at the beak of Cygnus the Swan. If you know the constellation of Cygnus the Swan, its beak is formed by what you think with the naked eye is a single star, but it's actually two stars very close together. There's an awful lot of those in space, right? Most stars are actually multiple systems, it seems. So some things are absolutely stunning when you look at them through a telescope or binoculars. I mean, my recommendation to anybody who's interested, who's thinking about becoming interested in night sky, start with binoculars. Get some good binoculars, 50mm diameter objectives, probably something like 7 times or 10 times magnification so that you can handhold them, unless you want to pay for image stabilized ones. You don't want to put them on a tripod, it's, you know, not good. Then you might graduate if that continues, you know, if that intrigues you more, then you might want to get a telescope. You can always get a second-hand one like I did. I paid £900 for my telescope. I think it would probably cost about 2,500 new. But then I spent a fair bit of money on, you know, eyepieces and star diagonals and things like that, which is the way that it tends to go. But I hope somebody might think about asking. Somebody did ask me this when I did the version of this presentation before. Somebody said, how do you know that the detail you've got in Jupiter is actually there? That it's not an artifact? And I was a bit kind of nonplussed at the time, but subsequently I've developed an answer to that question, which I'm going to tell you anyway, even though you didn't ask. Which is that if you take out your Barlow lens and take a data set at a different magnification, and then you process that data set at a lower magnification, and then you compare the results of the two, then I would argue that if you can see the same things in the two processed data sets, then it means that the data is real. It's not just an artifact of the wavelets or whatever. It's not deep fake stuff. I assure you, you are actually, those blue tints are really there. That orange is really there. Not in all the time. I mean, Jupiter changes. It's a very dynamic atmosphere, but it changes. But, you know, you look at all sorts of different images of Jupiter, and you sometimes will see all of that colour, sometimes it just looks grey and white, boring. But I am perfectly satisfied that what I have shown you is pretty good. The more I thought about this, and I've done a lot of thinking about this data set, I can assure you, in developing this presentation, is I think that the atmospheric dispersion has given a kind of smear at 45 degrees to the vertical in the finished data. And I think if you look carefully at Callisto, you can see that it's not round. It should be. It should be a full phase round moon, fully illuminated by the sun. And I think I can convince myself that the shadow of Callisto has got something behind it which is quite dark. But no, I think it's probably a little bit elongated in that axis as well. And my theory is that that's probably a byproduct of the fact that the atmospheric dispersion has not been optically corrected. It's been digitally post-processed, right? So that's one thing I'd like to do. And with Image J, I'm pretty sure that as far as the Callisto bit is concerned, you could specify a region of interest which was annular, right? So you could have a circle which just fitted around Callisto and was round, and a wider one which fitted a bit further out, and then you could turn down the contrast in that annulus and therefore kind of restore the roundness of Callisto, which would make it more satisfying. But of course it's not image processing, it's kind of subjective image enhancement, which is, you're making it look better because it should look like that. Okay? Long-winded answer. Yes?
Is there any adaptive optics yet for amateur?
Not that I know of. I mean, it's very clever. I don't know if the rest of you all know about this, but what professional astronomers do is they have mirrors that can move so that you can distort the mirror, and that's why you project that laser beam into the sky. So you create an artificial star, which means you can work out what the point spread function of the atmosphere is, and then you can calculate the inverse point spread function, and then you can distort your mirror of your telescope so that it corrects optically for the point spread function. And that's the proper bee's knees way of doing astronomy, but it's all a bit swish, that. Certainly you don't get that for 900 quid.
If you have a strong star or some light source near the thing you're looking at, you might be able to use that. I just wondered if anything done in software or
well, I think kind of that's what AutoStacker is sort of doing, because it's moving around the little regions, the alignment points. That's what it's doing under the hood, I think, would be what I'd venture to suggest.
Jared?
So did you have, you've shown us about whatever it is, a dozen software packages. How many did you pick them from? What was the background to that, and was there a huge amount of work to get?
Well,
there are very few out there anyway.
Well, it's amazing what is there. I was just absolutely gobsmacked. I mean, I've spent my career really working with images and image processing. Machine vision, I worked in engineering. I used to, it was applied to machine vision then. Then I moved to the School of Environment, and I taught remote sensing for environmental remote sensing, so students could understand how the world had changed by looking at images from space over a period since 1972, thanks to Landsat data, things like that. So I've worked with image processing, and that's why I said I used my experience, and so I wouldn't expect just anybody to be able to just quickly settle on a good set of tools like this. But for each category, I mean, like for example with fire capture, which is the image acquisition package, there's another one called SharpCap, and whenever you buy a camera you usually get a tool that comes with it as well, but usually people recommend either using fire capture or SharpCap. So what I did most of the time was read what other people, the advice other people gave to shortcut that process. When it comes to stacking, there are several options out there, and some do different jobs. There's a thing called deep sky stacker, which is used typically for deep sky astronomy, which is nebulae and stuff like that, not planets. But there are other tools. I can't remember them now, I'm afraid. I've kind of basically put them to one side because I made a decision and tried to learn how to more effectively use the tools which I'd selected. So for me it was AutoStackert and then Registax. But as the name implies, Registax can also do stacking, and there's a lot of overlap between these tools as well. And so again, I took advice from people that went before as to where to draw the boundary within each of these packages. So I didn't try and use AutoStackert for many other things other than the quality-based sorting and the stacking, and I used Registax just for the wavelet filtering and the colour correction, because you saw how effective that was, or how easy and effective it was. So it's that was just a great find as far as I was concerned. And then now ImageJ is, if you're not familiar with it, I suggest you go look. It's developed by the National Institutes of Health, so it's American government funded, and because of that, that's why it's freely available. And there are thousands of plugins for ImageJ, and it's used extensively by the scientific community. So there's some fantastically cool stuff that a free package like ImageJ can do, because it's freely available and it's been taken up by scientific communities and used, and they don't have to pay exorbitant prices for licenses to do that. So they have the freedom to experiment and play with it. And the world is your oyster with ImageJ, and there's lots of specialised versions that you can get hold of as well. There's another one called Fiji, and Fiji stands for Fiji is, I think it's Fiji is ImageJ or something like that. That's what actually Fiji means, because it's just basically a wrapper, an interface wrapper that's wrapped around ImageJ, and that interface has been a bit customised by a particular community, scientific community. There's tons of stuff there, so I really wish I'd had time to illustrate ImageJ a bit more, but
well, maybe we'll get you back next year.
Maybe.
Tal.
This is a general question,
Yeah.
On the structure there, you got porcelain
Planetarium, yeah.
Is there a physical building in porcelain?
No, this is me. I am Portslade Planetarium. This is the physical edifice of Portslade Planetarium. I take this democratization of learning very seriously, really. And so what I decided to do when I took up astronomy, I just couldn't see why you would take pictures of such wonderful things as that out there in space and then keep it to yourself. I wanted to make sure that as many people as possible knew about what was going on out there. It's absolutely gobsmacking, I can tell you. And I've given presentations like this to my daughter is a school teacher, and I've given presentations. I take my telescope in because it's a robotized telescope. It's got, it will automatically track things, and I take that in and I set it up in the school hall, and I just press a button and it goes, and the kids go. It blows their minds, and I think, well, I've done I've done the world a service there by doing that. And so I thought that if I put stuff out on Instagram, I'd suddenly be massive on Instagram, but it's not. It doesn't work like that. But slowly, people are finding out about it, and so if you look at look for hashtag Portslade Planetarium, all one word, doesn't matter whether it's capitalised or not, you will find some of my images. They're on Instagram, they're on Facebook, because why not? Because they're the same thing anyway. So what I like to do is I like to put a nice picture that I've collected, and then a bit of a discussion about the celestial object, because there's just so many amazing facts about how far away it is, how fast it's moving, how big it is, what makes it glow red like that, and in terms of nebulae and things. And then I have a thing at the end which I call geek facts, which is the acquisition parameters and so on. Because actually I've got another telescope now, because my big old telescope doesn't do deep sky imaging very well. You asked me, how impressed are you with what you see? My other telescope doesn't have a viewfinder at all. It's fully automated, and it just builds up images. It does stacking inside the telescope. It's got a Raspberry Pi inside, believe it or not. It's made by a French company called Valnis, and it does all the stacking for you, and it points. You just align it, initialize it, and then you say, today I want to go and look at the Orion Nebula. And it goes off and finds the Orion Nebula, and then you start to, on your phone or your tablet, you start to see pictures of the Orion Nebula. So my Portslade Planetarium Instagram has got loads of that stuff on it as well, and that's enormously fascinating. And you just look at the sky, you can't see half of this stuff because it's so faint. But this is actually only a 2-inch diameter telescope. It's called a Valnis Vespera, and it's amazing. It really is amazing. And I'm just, through Portslade Planetarium, thank you for asking the question, I am trying to just do anything I can to promote the wonder of space. I'm not Brian Cox, I'm Graeme Awcock. Okay, that's as close as I can get.
Yes.
Yes.
Do you have much of a problem with light pollution in Portslade?
Well, yeah, everybody asked me that actually, and I did for a while because my garden is surrounded by streetlights in Port, and they because we're on a bus route and they've got massive tall streetlights, and they're all round. There's several of them all along the road along the side of my garden, and I was taking images of, the Wizard Nebula, and I noticed it had got a stripe on it, which I was convinced wasn't a nebula. And then I was pointing in the same direction at another target that was nearby, and I got a stripe on that as well. And after I sort of thought about it for a while, and I thought, do you know what I think that is? I think because the front element of the telescope lens is right at the front, and there's no projecting shield, that you're getting tangential rays coming from the streetlights around, and they are being refracted into the telescope and causing that. So I said to my wife, can you make me something out of felt that we can wrap around the end of the telescope, which I can pop on? So we made a little thing about that long, and we put some Velcro on it so you can easily just pop it on. Because what you don't want to do is close the arm of the telescope with that thing still attached, because it will jam. But that fixed it. And really, honestly, light pollution, I'm just amazed at what you can. I mean, there's a M101, I think it is a galaxy, a spiral galaxy, and there was I'd happened to have imaged it just by chance back at the beginning of last year, and then I read in my astronomy magazines, which I would thoroughly recommend, that there was a supernova had occurred in that galaxy. I thought, oh, let's have a look at that galaxy. Sure enough, my tiny little telescope could resolve that, and what I was able to do with ImageJ was make a before and after comparison. So I've got a little video that flips between those two things so you can see the supernova very clearly. I think that's pretty cool, considering it's from my back garden. And those spiral galaxies are really quite faint. I mean, if anyone wants to have a look at some of my stuff, I can just show you my phone at the front here afterwards. Stunned now. Okay?
That's fantastic. How many of you are now interested in astronomy? That's fantastic. Well,
good.
We got a local source down here.
Yeah.
I look forward to your YouTube tutorials.
There is a thing called Brighton Astro, which is a very good club, actually, very busy club with lots of members, and that's good.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.